You're listening to the Employee to Entrepreneur podcast with your host, Bill Clanton.
And welcome to the Employee to Entrepreneur podcast. I'm Bill Clanton, and we are talking about so many things about documenting my transition from being an employee to then being an entrepreneur. And to recap where we've been on our journey so far, we talked about a little bit about my background and where I got started. I did work in the radio industry for 20 some odd years, and it was a good job. I had fun. I loved what I did, but I just didn't like having somebody else telling me when and where I could spend time with my family. I wanted to have that freedom. I wanted to break the chains. Now, keep in mind though, being an entrepreneur or being self-employed, however you interpret it, it brings its own gamut of stress and chains along with it. So, as I said in our very first episode, that entrepreneurship is not for everyone. Some people are content punching a clock and getting your paycheck, the steady income. And when you're an entrepreneur, you are looking more at the potential of products or of what you're doing, and that's your product, and not so much the money. The way I look at it is a self-employed person chases the money, whereas an entrepreneur chases the potential. And that's always the battle between whether or not you take work or you do this job or you look at the potential, you build this relationship. And that's really what it comes down to, is building relationships. And then we talked about in the last episode, the 5 days that changed my life, and how I basically for 5 days went on vacation and pretended for those 5 days that I was already outside of my job and an entrepreneur and self-employed at that point. And just by pretending, it really put my mindset where it needed to be able to pull the trigger and make the leap. And the reason for that, the 5 days gave me this wonderful opportunity to become more self-aware. I was already aware of what I was capable of achieving. It's not like I came from a rough background. I came from a very supportive background in my childhood with parents that pretty much said I could do anything I put my mind to. So I had the support growing up. I always had that cheerleader type mentality from my parents. I had two parents that had a great work ethic. If money needed to be made to put food on the table, they worked hard to do it. I look at my father, who was able to reinvent himself numerous times just to make sure that he could support us. And if, looking back at a lot of that, it is truly amazing when I'm able to look back at how many times he was able to reinvent himself just to make sure that he was able to achieve that goal of supporting the family. Were we always the wealthiest? No. Were we poor? No. But it wasn't like we were driving a Mercedes, but there was always a roof over our heads and food on the table. And a big part of that comes from being self-aware. Know your talents. Know what you're good at, and knowing what you yourself, whatever you are able to put your mind to, and what you're able to achieve. So with looking at this over that 5-day period when I was pretending that I didn't have a job, I was able to look at what is my skill set? What talents do I have? And as I mentioned in the last podcast, I talked about the things that prepared me to be able to make this leap. So I was able to look at where my talents were and focus just on those talents. I didn't want to, not so much that I didn't want to, it's just I did not have the time to spend on learning a new skill. I had to focus on what I was already good at. And I knew what that was. I was good at creating things, being creative. I was good at building web pages. I really knew what I was doing. When I got under the hood of a website, I could solve problems. So I became more of the problem solver for a lot of my clients. Would I take on website projects? Yeah, of course, that became the bread and butter of my business initially, because I had to have some sort of cash flow. But in the end, I really tried to tailor what I was doing to where my strengths were, and that's where my strengths were to be a problem solver. But when I made this leap, I did this kind of the crazy way, and I don't necessarily suggest this to anyone. I did the crazy thing of taking a leap without having any money in savings. Yeah, nothing in savings, and just kind of flew blind without a net. But during that week, before I actually left my job, I did have a few jobs lined up. So I knew that at least for the first few months, I was going to see some money coming in. So I don't want you to think I was totally insane jumping off the bridge with no income coming in, a family to support. But a couple things. One, I did have some leads lined up that I was able to get lined up before I left the job. And my wife had a business that was starting to become successful as well. So I did have her income, which her income at that time was not anywhere near what I was bringing home at my job, but it was at least enough to give that kind of cushion combined with the leads I already had lined up. But there's that feeling, though, once you start to look at it, you take on a few jobs and you get paid for those jobs and then they're done. And that's when it starts to get real. And the real feeling is when the real stress starts to set in, that this idea of getting another client, getting another check, getting another client, getting another check, it becomes an ongoing, perpetual series of chasing dollars. And that's where one of the things I started doing was looking at what opportunities were there for me to continue making money without having to constantly chase the leads. But you know what? When it comes down to it, that is a necessary evil of any business. You need leads in order to make money. One of my friends, Tom Forgione, says that a business without leads is a hobby. So I was not running a hobby. I was all in, so getting leads was necessary. And how did I get leads? Well, it just took a little bit of networking. I was able to do a lot of grassroots, a lot of word of mouth, because of my reputation at my previous job. That was one thing that helped me. And then just my overall ability to see a need, fill a need. I love that line. You ever watch the movie Robots? It's one of my favorite movies, that I watch with the kids. And I love that line from the movie. See a need, fill a need. And that's what I did. So pretty much in a lot of my cases, I was getting the job because I was seeing a need that the client had, and then I was able to solve their problem. STP, solve their problem by providing some sort of service through my company. So again, I flew without a net, but I did have leads lined up. So I had those leads over that 5-day period when I was pretending that I was an entrepreneur. Well, I wasn't fully pretending. I was actually doing. It wasn't like I was just having a tea party with the kids. I was actually doing things over those 5 days. And then from that, after I got back from that vacation, that's when I pulled the trigger and set up that meeting with the regional vice president. And I almost gave him a heart attack, but I pretty much told him I was leaving. And then that leads into my gradual departure. So as we document my transition from employee to entrepreneur, it didn't happen just like flipping a switch and then boom, I'm out. No, I did give the employer, because like I said, I left on, for lack of a better term, good terms. So I made it a gradual transition from my job to going out on my own, where I actually had to hire my replacement Oh, yeah. I had to go through the whole hiring process of hiring my replacement and made it a gradual transition. And we'll talk more about that in the next episode. That's going to wrap things up for this episode of the Employee to Entrepreneur podcast as we document my transition from being an employee to now being an entrepreneur. And if you want to find me on social media, you can find me on Instagram. Look for my post there. Look for Bill Clanton, B-I-Z. That's Bill Clanton Biz on Instagram. Bill Clanton Biz on Twitter. Catch my posts there. And find my company's fan page on Facebook at WWN Interactive. Just search for that. WWN is in Nancy, Interactive. And you can stay connected with me. Feel free to direct message me, send me messages, and I'd love to see some questions and even answer some questions. Consider me an open book as I am writing that book. Yep, the new book will be coming out this spring. I'm so excited that I'll be putting this book out. And the name of the book, can you guess it? Employee to Entrepreneur, 5 Days That Changed My Life. New book will be coming out soon, and we'll get you more details on that as well. Again, thanks for listening to the podcast, and feel free to message me.
This has been the Employee to Entrepreneur podcast, a production of WWN Interactive.